Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast. Today's episode, we're going to unpack the market maker methodology, how you can attract, connect, nurture, close, and delight your clients and build a business that works harder for you than you work for it. Let's get started. Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we help business-minded real estate agents stop chasing leads and help them start attracting business. We don't claim to make winners here. We do claim that we help winners win bigger and faster. Building your business is building your database, one that works harder for you than you do for it. So if you want to get off the transaction treadmill, keep on listening. If you want the shortcut to dominating your market, then go to www.marketmakersystems.com/demo. You know, there's in my understanding, I remember running my business when I had no methodology in the beginning, and some of the problems that I felt like were created with no methodology was it was hard for me to teach. And so what I learned, and you may have learned this as well, but what I think is important to point out here is when you have a philosophy, and let me say what I mean by that. Let's say in life you believe, maybe you believe you should never cold call anybody. Maybe you believe you should cold call somebody. Maybe you believe you should work by referral. Those are all philosophies, and philosophies, to me, are a person's way based upon their experience of how they do something. And so my philosophy is in fact, it's more of the way that I communicate it. And my methodology is the way that I execute it. And so one of the things that I think is important for people to find out is, as a market maker, we do have a core philosophy. And I think one of the things that's important is our methodology is how we execute that. And the philosophy is you really have two ways to get business. You have inbound and outbound. And the market maker methodology is basically how you exercise in today's world a sales and marketing function of a business in order to not only generate a client but delight them and then ultimately receive referrals. So my question is always, to when people ask me, and I don't know how you respond to this, but where did your philosophy on attracting business versus chasing business come from? And so I'm going to ask you that question, Mr. Oddo.
Sure. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, the beauty of having a methodology and being able to communicate it is really the ability to not miss a step. That's one of the things I want to circle back on, because I feel like all the time people try to just cut corners and go right to the end and really aren't very clear on the steps that are required in order to build a strong business and a good pipeline. And so, to answer your question, give me the question again.
I was just let me reframe the question.
Okay.
Do you have any methodologies and philosophies outside of business that you could share in just your personal life? Share a core philosophy you have in your personal life.
Absolutely. So my 5-year-old son, I've been teaching him a mental model, a core philosophy of doing the right thing because it's right. So if you go up to him, you can ask him, why do we do the right thing? He'll say, because it's right. So anytime he does something wrong, I ask him if that was the right thing and make him repeat back to me that particular mental model. I have a ton of mental models. I mean, we've talked about them plenty. Every adversity has with it the seed of equal or greater benefit. I feel like that's one of the most powerful ones.
Can't make a good deal bad or a bad deal good.
Boom. You know it. It'll reveal itself. And that's one of the best things in real estate, especially because it's kind of an emotional roller coaster sometimes. You want the deal to get closed. You want everybody to be happy. But for me, it's going to reveal itself, and there's not much you can do about it other than the things that you have control of. And once you do those, then you just kind of stand firm and wait back to see the outcome.
So yeah, I mean, and that makes me think, like, just to kind of put some perspective, like a philosophy, that you currently have right now, in business for me is knowing the numbers, right? Like I have a philosophy that there's no reason to guess when you can know, and you should always try to be getting to the truth. And so that's a philosophy that I have. And because of that, part of my method in which I do things that's important is that anytime that I put a system in my business, anytime I make sure that I can report on it. Because again, I have another philosophy is that what is reported improves. What is measured and reported publicly, it improves dramatically. What is and there's another layer to that word improves exponentially. But the point is that my mental model is when I'm looking at building a business, my philosophy is that you don't need to know a million things, but every single person in the company should be in charge of a couple things, two that are the most important to me. One is everyone should be responsible of some form of content production. And that's because I believe in an inbound methodology when growing a business. And that's we'll get into that in a little bit when the business starts to work over time harder for you than you do for it. So I think everybody should have that. And then I believe everybody in a business should have two metrics at minimum, three at maximum. And if it's two metrics, it's one is a leading indicator. So, and one is a lagging indicator. One is a KPI, one is a KRI. One is something that they do as an activity, make a phone call, write a handwritten letter, go on an appointment. And one is a KRI, which is a result, which is usually results can be measured in dollars, in sales volume, in listings taken, things like that. So that's just and I hope, if I was training somebody, or if I was helping them grow the business, one of the problems that I see in real estate is that all of those metrics when you're a solopreneur fall on your shoulders, and all of the responsibility to measure them fall on your shoulders. Mm-hmm. And all of that is a job in itself. And to make money in real estate, you really need to be focused on sales than marketing. And it's hard to do sales and marketing if you don't have somebody who's doing the reporting and giving you the numbers you need to know.
Absolutely. We have been working on our economic model, you and I, and to me, it's so enlightening, and it's such a breath of fresh air to be able to have that information. I've always been envious of like casinos. The house always wins. They've got all these actuaries. They know all the numbers, and it's almost such a huge competitive advantage. It's crazy to think of the time when I didn't have that personally. And it starts with just one thing, and then you add the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And as far as publicly reporting the numbers, personally for me in business, having the employees publicly report the numbers in a little huddle, which is something that the first time I saw was down at your office. I knocked it off immediately. I think you got it from the book Rockefeller Habits. Mm-hmm. That changed the numbers dramatically. Being able to do that when I reported them and kind of kept them to myself, I was thinking through how I was going to improve them, what kind of things I could do, what kind of incentives I could push. But just having the individual publicly report on their numbers to the entire team was a huge game changing thing. As far as what would you say the first thing that somebody should start to measure would be in their real estate business?
Well, that's a great question. I think that would, and I want to answer that question, but before I answer it, one thing I want to point out is, how they acquire customers. So to answer the question directly, I think what, in business, you have to start with sales first, then marketing second. And sales gives you the feedback loop on what you need to know in marketing. So in sales and marketing, you have this weird relationship and handoff, right? And there is a handoff that happens, and it happens at some point, and you have to identify that point of when someone is going to be responsible for this relationship. This is what me and you work on every day and work on together. And what we realize is that, think about it as a funnel, right? As a marketing funnel. So you have this top of funnel, and the top of funnel is going to have these metrics. And so and the best way is to explain to me is, imagine the biggest interstate in your city, and that city has cars that are driving down it every single day, and all of those people are your ideal customers. So if you owned a gym, every single person in on that highway is looking to join a gym. And every single day they're passing billboards and signs to make an exit to your gym. And that's the top of your funnel. And your goal is to get their attention, which they're strangers. And your goal is to attract them to your exit. Exit highway 2261A. And here's the reasons why. And so you have, that in my business, that's what we call, in any business, in any funnel, that's called total addressable market. Are you going after, if you're a real estate agent, are you going after sellers or buyers? How many transactions are in your marketplace? Are you going after this neighborhood or that neighborhood? How many households? What's the turnover rate? That's kind of the top of the funnel, strangers to attract to your business. And so that's one of the things. Now, that is a marketing's responsibility. In an inbound methodology, that is that. Now, in outbound, it's the same thing, but the difference is you're going to be reaching out to that person. So how many expireds, how many FSBOs, how many people just filed for divorce, how many people on probate. Okay, so outbound is you're making an outbound call to a stranger. Inbound, you're trying to use some type of image, headline, something like that to attract. And so I believe one of the unfortunate real truths in real estate is that the people that are doing the best in our marketplace are attracting business, but the unknown ugly secret is the only reason they're attracting business is because somebody either gave them a bunch of money or they chased it at the beginning. It's very rare. Now, there are exceptions, and the exceptions are the girl that outsold me one year in my brokerage, which she was very involved in her church, and she was the sweetest thing ever. Very nice, loving girl. You couldn't, but if you met her, you would never want to do if she sold anything, you would buy it from her. And she had more referrals. And just for the record, that is a form of attraction. And so you asked me what would I track? I would segment the funnel down into what we call leverage points, and those are places where you have to create conversion mechanisms. So our methodology is real simple. You have strangers that turn into leads. Leads turns into conversations. Conversations turn into appointments. Appointments turn into, and these are appointments, that's face-to-face, whether it's seller or buyer. They either turn into listings or buyer contracts, and then those turn into which are
commission dollars.
Yeah, that buyer contracts just assume that we're saying that the contract with the listing is going to sell and the buyer's going to sell. And if not, it's not because they're going to go do business with somebody else. It's because they decided not to sell, just for all intents and purposes. And then once the home is sold, the final step is referral. And so at each one of those, the market maker methodology, which is somebody who's going to go out and make a market, meaning, in any market, if you look at the stock market, there's a buyer and a seller, and a stockbroker connects the two. A market maker, we have buyers and sellers in our market, and market makers create a market, and they take the responsibility. They're not just sitting back waiting on, a referral, which is out of their control, hoping that, the person that they met at soccer or whatever is going to send their friend that way. What they're looking for is to go out and make a market, and every day they know there's something in their control, and they're going to do something about it, and they're going to measure it both on what is in their control and the result they're going to produce. And so the market maker methodology is you attract strangers, you connect with leads, you then nurture with conversations, you close appointments, you delight your listings and your buyers when they're doing business with you, then which ultimately generating referrals. So to me, that is the simple way. And so what am I measuring there? How many referrals? How many closings? How many appointments? How many conversations? And I'm just going to tell you, the number one metric I would track if I was in business would be my cost per conversation. That's the most, because that is that handoff that you can, that could be so expensive. Here's why. Because it is a beacon to tell you if you have a person problem in your system. So cost per conversation leads and strangers. So
unpack that a little more. What would be an example?
Well, so I'll give you an example. If I give you 100 leads and they cost me $1 a piece, and you talk to one of them, then what was the cost per that conversation?
$100.
$100. Now, what are all the things you could do to talk to two of them?
Personally, I feel like
what are all the things you could do if I give you 100 leads? I just gave them to you. You got their phone numbers. They came in today. You talked to one of them, and I'm saying by the end of the day, you need to talk to two of them. What would you do?
I would load them up into the dialer.
You call them twice. Maybe you would email them. Maybe you text message them. Maybe you would instant message them. Right.
Right.
What we do in our system that we created, we got the perfect 29-day follow-up system, which has been proven and tested to drive that number. But the point is if you want me to unpack it and you play this out with me, is that you would do something to increase your probability. So there was something in your control that you would do outside of whatever you had already done that only yielded you one conversation. Now, one reason why you might have only one conversation is you only made one phone call. So you might decide, hey, listen, I'm going to make 2 phone calls. I'm going to make 3 phone calls. But what I'm saying is that if I give it to Alex and Anthony, okay, and I give 100 leads to Alex and 100 leads to Anthony, and Alex's cost per conversation is 100, and they're both the same skill set, but Anthony's cost per conversation is $25, then that means that Anthony is doing something in his process. And this is what we do. It's called a core process. When you are in charge of marketing, you should have a core process. And when you are in charge of selling, you should have a core process. If you have an inbound methodology and an outbound methodology, which is the market maker methodology, then you should have core processes that allow you to drive those metrics. Now, the great thing about it is I can see Alex, and let's say he makes all the calls himself. Well, Alex could actually invest in a technology, because here's what happens. Processes can be automated. And a lot of the times, Michael Oddo, and you know this because you're one of the best in the world at that, is when you automate those, you get more consistent, predictable results. And so what you're looking for in this stranger to referral pipeline is you're looking for the bottlenecks. And not only the bottlenecks, but you're looking for, do you have people problems or do you have process problems? And so what happens is when you move from being the only individual responsible for making the actual conversion, making the conversion take place. So let's say in this scenario, Alex is an agent, has no one on his team, and he's 100% responsible. It's completely different than when you scale the business and you give the lead to someone else and they're responsible. When they become responsible, the critical metric of cost per conversation gives you the ability to coach and lead that salesperson to their fullest potential, because you can now look at metrics and say, listen, man, I gave you 100 leads. Your cost per conversation is way too high. You know, our number one seller is cost per conversation is this. Tell me what you're doing when you get a lead. I'm doing this, that, and the other. Why are you doing that? Why, I mean, are you not doing the perfect 29-day follow-up? Not really sure what that means. Well, didn't you get the email we sent you on how to get that set up and customize all your voicemails, text messages, and emails and all that? Oh, no, I didn't see the email. Okay, well, what email did we have on file for you? I know you just started. Oh, well, we had the wrong email. Yeah, man, listen, man, you should be at this 43% conversation rate and a conversation cost per conversation of XYZ. Did you know 1 in 34 conversations turns into a closed deal? Yeah, you can't just be doing all that stuff manually. We could automate 90% of that. You see, that's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I think people don't naturally realize is no matter what form of marketing they're using, even if it's just their time, there is a cost per conversation that they're having. When I first got into the business, I got this old set of real estate tapes from the 1970s. I still remember the cover of it. It was a guy named Dave Diegelman. And he talked about the cost per conversation. And so every time, and back then it was a traditional brokerage I was at, every time the phone would ring, I would have in my mind, this is a $40 conversation, and I would attribute a dollar amount to it, even though I didn't know what I didn't know. It's pretty enlightening to look at, especially if you take all of your marketing costs and just divide them. If you're not doing an inbound strategy, if you just have kind of traditional marketing, One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Mike, was uh, inbound versus outbound. Uh, I was I was talking with Chance this morning, who's the head of our marketing, and he was giving me a scenario in which an agent an agent's perception of the leads were, oh, the leads aren't very good. And what I was telling him, and I wanted to chime in on this earlier, was that, in my opinion, any excuse to have a conversation with a prospect that they volunteered their information, they went through the terms of service and said it was okay for me to contact them, text them, email them, etc., is a good up to bat if I can get them on the phone. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, my thought is that my question to anybody would be, can you give me, and listen, man, can you define a good lead for me so that I understand what you mean on good and bad is a perception. So if you go to the bank and you stand in line for 5 minutes, and I go to the bank and stand in line for 5 minutes, you could say, man, that was quick, and I could say that was long. Why? Because we both have an opinion on what long is. Now, if I have lived my life going to the bank and it taken 25 minutes, that would be perceived as fast. And so that is the problem, is that you have to work on agreements with agents when you work with them and come to an agreement on what that is. Now, we call that a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead. And so in our methodology, one of the very first things that you have to do is establish a definition between the marketing and sales department on what a qualified opportunity is. Now, here's the thing. In all intents and purposes, and so the market maker methodology, one of the problems and one of the solutions that we had to solve was, when you put all the leads in one basket, you have to have a system that gives you dual permissions to have access to them. And
Right.
and most systems don't. No system, I don't know of any system in real estate except for the system that you customized and built with us when we were making 20,000 outbound calls per week. And what I mean by that is that in most systems, one person owns the contact, and the problem with that is, if you have an inside sales department now or in the future, when the ISA sets the appointment, or the SDR or the virtual person, whoever sets the appointment, they have to transfer that ownership to the next person. And that's the handoff that, if that appointment doesn't happen, gets back on the other person's plate. Who handles the reschedules, the calls, and more importantly, if you're doing outbound and you have a sales development rep, an SDR, making outbound calls and an outbound strategy, how are they building that nurture pipeline? Now, all of that is real simple. And I've literally written an entire book on it called Inside Sales Predictability. You may or may not have read it, but you can get a free copy at InsideSalesPredictability.com. It's an outbound methodology if you read that book. But the reason why I say that is because that relationship, defining that up front, is important. Now, for me, anybody that answers the question that they are thinking about moving in the next 12 months is a great lead. In fact, it's one of my best scripts. We built a real estate brokerage from scratch in 2016. That means in January 2nd, I had one agent. And by October, the month of October, and I worked with Mr. Oddo, or Michael Oddo. I worked with you. And one of the reasons why I worked with you is because you were one of the only people on the planet that would work with me. And you gave me a nickname. We won't share it. But I am
Wow.
I am a process snob.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a process snob, and I want to get things done right. And it was awesome because I think we built something special. But I learned a lot, and it was a humbling experience. And I know what goes into building great products, which is one of my passions. In fact, I wrote a white paper called Hitmaker as a result of our work together. And it was just being committed to getting the right thing done and not giving up on it. And during that process, your question was, what's a good lead? During that process, I learned that having that understanding is important, but it is elastic to the person. So marketing should have a definition. Sales should have a definition. In my opinion, a perfect real estate business, at some point, if they want to get predictable, they're going to hit a ceiling on what they can produce in the marketplace at scale. It's not going to be infinite, right? You're not going to just everybody in the world that's selling this month isn't going to respond to your
Right.
promotion. So you have to use kind of a you have to use multiple campaigns. And so if you want to get to an attraction type business, it's when you're layering in branding and your personal brand in your marketplace, and you start to become like a legend. And you have experienced that in your business when you became the top agent at the Lake of the
Absolutely.
Ozarks. And I experienced that in my marketplace. And so the transition is you go from this outbound methodology to building this huge pipeline of people that you're nurturing with branded content. And that's a tip of spear. That little audience in itself, we did 161 nurtures in January of 2016. A third of those people sold their home in the month of June.
Define nurture again.
Now, a nurture for us was anybody that was selling their home in the next 12 months. And what I did was I invested in labor dollar, meaning I used our system. You built out the dual relationship. We did have some inbound, but we also created pipelines in outbound. And outbound was, we would get somebody and they weren't a sales qualified lead, meaning they weren't ready for the outside sales department or the agent, because we had a dual relationship, or we had a dual responsibility, meaning we had someone who was responsible. And this is hard to understand, but if you read the book Predictable Revenue, Mary Lou Tyler and Aaron Ross nailed this concept. And it's really the marriage between, that book and sales acceleration formula, because they're both different. One is an outbound and one is an inbound. And me and you obviously have been working on a book called I'm not going to leak the title because we're not 100% committed to the title, but it is about this work that we've been doing together. And the point that I'm trying to make is that there is no such thing as a bad lead. There's just a bad sales and marketing
Process.
management, process and department and discipline. Now, for me, you should be in the business of building subscribers. That means you want everybody in your community to subscribe to your podcast, to subscribe to your blog, and you want to have a situational opt-in, which means when they get on and subscribe, they subscribe to you being the person who they're going to look to for information, right? And so those might be videos, those might be newsletters, those might be blog posts, those might be vendor updates, those might be market trends updates, whatever it is.
This is the essence of marketing in itself. When they first started to run commercials to try to sell the consumer on the ketchup brand before they got to the store, that's the goal.
Yeah, educating these people, exactly. And the reason why is because when somebody at the top of the funnel in our methodology, when you're in the traction phase, you are communicating problems in the marketplace that people then you get their attention. And what's happening is when the very act of getting their attention, if you do it in the right way, at some point in that relationship, as their consumption of the content goes up, they believe that you understand their problem better than anybody else. And there, in that moment, you now own that mind. And your goal is to have that with everybody who is in your marketplace, because you want to have market share.
Right. Market mind share. It's one of the reasons why Warren Buffett invests in Coca-Cola. What he specifically says is that Coca-Cola owns a small piece of a large number of humans' minds, and that's not going away anytime soon. And it's happened over, decades. And it's top of mind consciousness. And it's one of the things when you attract a lead that you want to make sure that you're continuing to basically drip on that lead, so that when they do think about selling, you're that first person. And if you look at billboards or park benches or the things that are kind of traditional, that's the goal of the agent. When you attract properly and you're getting that lead to come to you first and give you their information and give you the permission to continue to reach out to them, you're doing it in a much more structured and targeted way that is way more efficient than just a regular kind of shotgun approach, things of that nature. What I wanted to ask you, Mike, was I didn't do a lot of outbound in my business. I really didn't do any after I learned how to market and receive inbound leads. When do you think is the best time to lace in the outbound strategy rather. I know that a lot of what you were doing was a solution to a real problem, which is when agents generate a lot of leads in their market, they'll run up against kind of a cap or a law of diminishing returns, and so that was a lot of the formula for your initial outbound strategy. But do you think that agents should be starting with outbound? Do you think that it's something that they should kind of get their internal muscle built up on right out of the gate? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's a great question. I don't think there's a universal answer. I think it depends on the budget and the person's preference. And what I mean by that is that there's a million ways to build a business. But I think every business should have in its final year 5 a vision of having both, because it would be like saying, I'm going to sell McDonald's, but I'm not going to have a drive-through. Well, there's no reason. It's just another way to, allow your customer to come and do business with you more frequently. And as a result, if you don't, you might lose business, right? And so, in the future, I think, I think that you should. I think business is two people talking, and I think that those conversations, whether they're on text, or they're in a virtual world at some point in the future. I don't know what technology is going to do, but I still think that people are going to need, people are going to still need advice. They're going to need to talk to people that they trust, and so, in my opinion, you say, okay, based upon my budget, what do I have to invest? You only have 2 resources. You have time and money. And when you invest money, you're basically buying your time back to invest however you want. Maybe you invest it in sitting on the couch and hanging out with your kids or at the boat dock. You can do that. If you're paying somebody else to do the stuff that you're not doing that needs to be done in order for you to continue to produce the results that allow you to sit and afford the boat dock, right? So most people that I know in real estate, if we want to just take the average agent, they don't have that luxury. And so I don't want to get off with, creating that type of answer, but it is true. But I do have my own core philosophy is there's not a one-time fits all. If I was asking somebody, I do believe that a person's success is in direct correlation to the skills that they acquire over time. Meaning you can have everything you want in life, and if you don't, it's simply you haven't learned something yet. The question is, if this is your goal, what are you willing to sacrifice to get there? And so if you get to the point where you find somebody who's not willing to make outbound calls with people, they're probably not going to be able to lead other people to make their calls because they're struggling with something mentally. And everything in business is really a thought and constraint in their own head, because they say, if you've ever heard, they say every problem in business is a leadership problem, but leadership is still a thought. And so if you don't even know what that means, then it's still to me, leadership is, how could I lead somebody to do something that I've never done?
That's insightful.
Maybe you actually can, but how can I lead somebody to do something that I believe I would never want to do? Right.
Absolutely. Even when I had a half a dozen people, ISAs, if you will, really they weren't ISAs, they were loan officers, and that was the progression. Making the calls, I would still be there through till 9 o'clock at night making the calls, because we would call 6 to 9. That was one of the best times to get a hold of people, and I was really good at it. And even after years of doing it, I would still keep a script next to me. It was like a little security blanket, because that first call, you kind of get those butterflies, and then once you're into the conversation, it's over, and just on to the next one. So there's a lot of ways to attract. I guess we'll agree on that. It can be through inbound or outbound. I'm not. Well, the thing is that it's not about, it's not about. You asked me a question and you said, when would we do it? I just want to make sure I answer that question. And gotcha. It's not one size fits all. All I was referring to there was that, you have to take in business, if you're an agent and you have a bad lead, or you're deciding when you should do one of the other. What I would say is, you have to identify the core of the problems that are holding you back from getting to your goals. And then you got to get real clear on the things that you need to learn. I'm telling you that you need to learn sales and marketing
And that's my belief. I've given that advice to other people in the past. I've kind of given you some different metrics in which I would measure in order to know that I was doing a good job at that. What is the follow-up answer to the opposite side of that question is the attract. And here's what I know. The best business to have is a business that you attract. So let's unpack that for a second. What does that mean? Well, that means where people are coming to you and asking you to do business with them. And
Right.
so what does that take? Well, what that takes is a very strong value proposition, because they're actually right now the problem that you have to understand, Mike, is, and this was shared with me with Dan Kennedy. Dan Kennedy's one of the top direct response marketers in the country, and I was driving down the road with him, and he said, Mike, he was telling me on why he passed 9 different doctors' offices to go to the doctor that he works with, and the point here is that when we don't go to the doctor that is closest to our house, we go to the best doctor, right?
Right.
And in the marketplace, it's your ability to have a value proposition that can be communicated. Warren Buffett, one of his top sayings is 50% of your success is your ability to articulate your durable competitive advantage, which is why someone should do business with you versus somebody else. And so when we attract these strangers, we're attracting them under a certain message. Now, if we're attracting strangers, and here was the problem that Dan Kennedy said. Dan Kennedy said is that 50% of all the real estate transactions are done and they're done in a way where the customer or the consumer picks the agent second, because he believes they look for the home first. So if you really understand what I just said there, it's a profound shift in your thinking, is that people go and look for the home, and you don't have to believe me. You can look at our statistics, is that on the buy side, statistically, it's like 83%, last I remember, of all home buyers do business with the first person they come into contact with. And that's the problem with real estate, is that person in my marketplace, 50% of all agents didn't sell a home in 1 year, which was almost 20,000 agents. That's a bad experience, which is perpetuating the reasons why they're going to always look second, because in their last experience, the agent didn't have any impact or change on the outcome except unlocking the door. And we're getting deep here. But what I want to say is that if you're going to have an attraction business, then you have to have a message for your business, which is your brand, which is not your balloon. It's not Keller Williams being number one. That doesn't mean SHIT to the consumer. What you have to have is you have to have something on why they do business, why they should pick up the phone and call you. And therein lies the problem, because if you go one way, you might repel the luxury market in the very act of going with one thing versus going with another. And so I feel like we came up with a pretty strong universal value proposition that allowed us to that was very unique on both the buy and sell side. And I believe that if you don't have one, that's one thing you should work on getting.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I wanted to just dive in on that a little bit, because if you believe that 80% of the customers are going to do business with the first person they meet, which I do absolutely believe that, it's been my experience, then the goal should always be to be the first agent that they meet. And so when you're attracting business, the earlier you can attract them in that process, the more likely you're going to be able to create that relationship with them in a way that kind of puts blinders on them. I know in my market, they would drive past a dozen real estate offices coming down from Kansas City and St. Louis to come to me. And there was a time when I opened up another market, I didn't have a sign even up for a whole year. And they would go knock on the neighbors' doors trying to find me. And it just blew people's mind that could even happen, that they wouldn't end up at another agent's office. Most agents are used to, on the buy side specifically, converting leads that are sign calls or further down the process, where it's kind of a real natural conversation. The price is X. Would you like to take a look at it? Yes, great. They hop in the car. They go over and meet them. The real trick, the magic is in that connect and nurture process, to be able to get them early, communicate that value proposition to them in a way that would have them coming to you above all other options, including doing nothing at all, and drive them to your office when they're ready, right? And so, as far as the connect side and the nurture side, I feel like they're pretty correlated. When a person is speaking to a prospect and they understand what their goals are and they understand when they're going to be a little bit further down the process, it's my opinion that making them a promise that adds value and then delivering the promise is one of the best ways to be able to create a relationship with somebody. And it's like the old story, which I wasn't around for, the Fuller Brush Man, but he would come to the house, and if the man answered the door, the first thing he'd do is hand him a little beard brush, and it was that reciprocity, that since he just gave him a gift, the guy would take the time to listen to him. And so one of the things that as far as our methodology is concerned, that we strongly suggest is making them a promise and then letting the technology fulfill that promise, and not eliminate your follow up with that particular prospect, but help to supplement it in a way that builds that relationship. And what are some of your thoughts on that particular topic, Mike? As far as the nurture side is concerned, what are some of the things that agents could be doing, even without a fancy system?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a long conversation. I think they should read the book. But I think that, I can tell you that at the core, you should nurture people based upon a situational opt-in. A situational opt-in would be, selling 90 days, 6 months, next 2 years. Anytime that you bring someone into your database, you should be able to communicate to them based upon where they are. So segmentation is very important to nurturing. And I think that's one of the things that we identified in the book that was profound, is that, we segment in all of our marketing. And so you got to think about, you can segment buyers and sellers, local area, out of town, got to sell before they buy, stuff like that. And then, really defining what a qualified sales lead and market qualified lead, and define what a good lead really is important. And based upon those personas, if you will, you would nurture them with content that would do a couple things. So a nurture relationship in the funnel, if at the top of the funnel, you're going to get people aware of the problems, when you get to the middle of the funnel, it's where you're going to talk about solutions to the problems. And those solutions might be, things that they're sometimes aware about, and sometimes they might be problems that you bring up, but in the same context, you bring solutions. So an example would be, a home inspection with the seller. Okay. And so you might actually have an interview with the seller that talks about, why during the sales contract, you went under contract and you weren't, and during the option period, you had to do nothing because you pre-inspected the home. And you might have a stat that says somebody who tells you, hey, we're selling our home in the next 12 months. And you might have an email that goes out at 6 months and says, hey, guys, listen, headline might see, if you're still selling in 6 months, I wanted to share this with you. And it'd say how to prevent the home buyer from reaching in their pocket and taking out up to 5% of your home's equity after you've already agreed on a sales price. Listen to this case study on how we help you prevent that, And it would, again, you're trying to create problems your customer didn't know they have, and then provide solutions that are a part of your service. And what you're doing is you're demonstrating your expertise, demonstrating that you understand and understand their problem better than they do. Therefore, as they consume that content, you're moving into the position of the person that they're going to reach out to. And then everything like that, you would have, as you move further and further down in the nurture process, and you get more to the face-to-face, you're going to start sharing with them very specifics about your services and testimonials, right? And so you're demonstrating solutions to the problem, and then as that relationship gets closer and closer to them being a sales qualified lead, you're actually giving them content that is very specific to the services, or if you weren't in real estate, the products that you offer. So anyway, man, it's a lot to understand. One of the great things is that, like I said, me and Mike started on a book and documenting all this stuff. And one of the upcoming episodes that we're recording, we're going to share with you how you can go download a free chapter to the book, where we really start the book out with talking about the core philosophy and methodology, and diving a little bit deeper into the conversation we're having here today. But hopefully everybody found this very helpful. Today, man, Mike, I have a hard stop. I have a very busy day today. So, man, I appreciate you jumping on and having this conversation. And I hope everybody found a lot of value in this discussion.
Always a pleasure, man.
Absolutely, man. So we'll either see you at the top or at the lake.
See ya.